When conflict erupts in the Middle East, prophecy experts flood to YouTube and to the pulpits saying, "It's the end of times, Israel is the clock, Jesus is coming back." But here's the problem. That's not what Jesus said. Jesus warned us not to follow those voices, not to panic over wars, and definitely not to confuse his kingdom with earthly powers. Yet we've been doing it anyway. Christians are now defending cruelty in the name of God. Are we watching the wrong signs and ignoring people suffering right in front of us? Let's go back to the Bible and find out what Jesus really said about end times. I'm examining scripture, not politics. What did Jesus actually say? And is that different from what many Christians think he said? First, let's explore where these ideas actually come from, because they don't appear out of nowhere. Why do so many Christians think that they must support a nation-state's actions no matter what? Israel is Christianity's birthplace. It's Judaism's birthplace. It's called the Holy Land for good reason. For many people, it starts with dispensationalism. I know, that sounds like a medical condition, but it's actually a theological framework from the 1800s, spread mainly through a guy called John Nelson Darby and the Schofield Reference Bible. The big idea? History is split into dispensations, different eras where God interacts with humans differently. In this system, Israel plays a prophetic role in the final act. Basically, if Israel exists as a nation, the end times must be near. Now, the early church, they didn't believe this. It's not how Jesus taught his followers to interpret history. But it felt biblical, right? It pulled verses from Ezekiel, from Daniel, from Revelation, creating a neat little timeline where modern Israel signals Jesus' return. It spread like wildfire when Darby's ideas got printed in the Schofield Reference Bible. His notes appeared right in the margins, and people started reading his interpretations as if they were scripture itself. But here's the issue. It treats the Bible like a puzzle, as if one author wrote it all at once, in one voice. The Bible is more like a library, books written by many voices, inspired by God, across centuries, in different cultures and different contexts. It's inspired, yes, but also human and complicated. When we force it into some rigid system, we ignore the cracks and sometimes the people caught in them. I remember hearing this as a teenager in evangelical churches that I visited, that Jesus could return any minute, so I shouldn't plan for my future. It created this low hum of anxiety. I wasn't excited about Jesus coming. I was afraid. A massive contradiction to the Jesus I saw when I read the Bible. Once this system had become popular historically, it became profitable. Entire YouTube channels and publishing houses built on fear. Look at the signs. Buy the book. Jesus is coming tomorrow. Sincerity doesn't make it true, and fear doesn't make it faithful. So let's examine what Jesus actually said. Matthew chapters 24 and 25 are gold mines for understanding how we should think about the end times. Jesus lays it out, not in cryptic codes, but in plain language. First, he warns us, don't be fooled. He says there will be wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes, famines. But don't panic. These aren't signs that the end is here. They're just what it means to live in a broken world. Then he says something that should stop us cold. Beware of false prophets who come in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. The people using fear, conflict, and prophecy to stir up anxiety, Jesus already warned us about them. He says anyone claiming that the end is near or that violence will usher in some new age, they're not prophets. They're charlatans. And the real return of Christ? It won't be secret. It won't be symbolic. It won't be tied to conflict or to nation states. It'll be unmistakable. So if someone tells you to support violence or ignore suffering because it's part of God's plan, don't believe them. Jesus says that's not faith. That's fear dressed up as faith. But Jesus does tell us to be ready. He says, be like servants waiting for their master to return. Not passive, not panicked, just faithfully doing the work that we are given. And what work is that? Whatever you did for the least of these, you do for me. The hungry, the prisoner, the stranger, the poor. That's what preparation looks like in God's kingdom. Not arguing over timelines, not stockpiling prophecy charts, just living with compassion. So why does this framework have such a hold? Well, because it feels clear. It gives people a system, a chart, a timeline. In a chaotic world, that's comforting. You don't have to sit with mystery or uncertainty. You just follow the plan, check the signs, and watch the news. It gives a sense of control. For many people, it was inherited. Their church taught it. Their favorite preacher taught it. Their parents, their youth group, or their Bible college. And it felt biblical. Question it, and suddenly you're questioning the Bible itself. I get it. I really do. And the truth is, it's not all bad. Dispensationalists, they love the Bible. They want to be faithful. They're trying to make sense of the world through Scripture. And that's not something to dismiss. But there is a problem. It tells us to look at the world out there instead of the work in here. It turns faith into prediction, compassion into calculation. Every headline becomes a clue. Every tragedy becomes part of a countdown. And worst of all, it can make people think supporting injustice is somehow being faithful to God. And that's not what Jesus taught. That's not what the early church believed. And it's not the only way to read the Bible. There's a difference between reading the Bible seriously and reading it rigidly. We're allowed to ask, is this really the story that Jesus told? Bad theology doesn't just sit quietly in someone's head. It leaks out. It shapes how we see people, how we vote, how we defend, what we stay silent about. If you believe war and conflict is necessary to fulfill prophecy, that human suffering is somehow part of God's plan to speed up the second coming, then you'll start treating people like chess pieces, not image bearers of God. You'll side with power over people. You'll justify cruelty as obedience. You'll stop weeping when people die and just call it fulfillment. It's easy to intellectualize faith, prophecy and theology and forget about experience and conviction. But that's not the God revealed in Jesus. Jesus talked about the spirit of the law over the letter of the law. He never looked at pain and said, good, we're right on schedule. He didn't use suffering to make a point. He entered into it. He touched lepers. He wept at funerals. He told stories about Samaritans and widows and strangers being the heroes of God's kingdom. He didn't explain pain away. He carried it. So when we use theology to bypass empathy, to excuse injustice, or to look away from suffering because it doesn't fit our chart, we're not being prophetic. We're being complicit. We're using God's name to cover up fear, or worse, our apathy. That's how injustice survives in religious spaces. Not because people hate others, but because they think God needs others to suffer to bring about some higher plan. That's not just bad theology. That's dangerous theology. Maybe the real question isn't, how do we evangelize this world? Maybe it's, who needs the gospel most right now? Is it the mother in the rubble weeping, clutching her child's dust-covered body? Or is it the Christian who thinks that that's okay? And if your theology makes you numb to that grief, if it teaches you that her pain is necessary or even good, then maybe that's not the gospel at all. Because the Jesus I see in Scripture sides with the weeping. He says, blessed are those who mourn. He doesn't tell them, hurry up and die so the prophecy can move along. So what can we do? First, don't panic. Jesus never called us to fear the future. He called us to faithfulness in the present. We don't have to untangle every prophecy or solve every mystery or draw every line on the map. What we can do is stay close to the heart of Jesus. That means feeding the hungry, welcoming the stranger, making peace where others sow division. It means refusing to trade compassion for certainty, refusing to treat people like props in a divine drama, refusing to let fear set the agenda for our faith. Because when Jesus does return, if he returns in our lifetime, the question won't be, did you get the timeline right? It'll be, did you love well? Did you look after the ones I told you to? Did you live like I was right there with you? And that's what readiness looks like. My name is Jacob, and this might be church.